Hello, and welcome to week 9 in the psychology of personality. And here we go into chapter 11, which is the biology of personality, taking a little bit of a deep dive into the sort of the world of biopsychology itself. I teach biopsychology sometimes, and kind of sets the goal to how can we explain all of human behavior using just what we understand about the brain and chemistry and the electrical system within our nervous system, and without any sort of other quality in impacting that. So the biological perspective on personality is that all of personality arises from biological processes. When we look at personality traits, we often think about traits that we have that match our relatives, so that we sort of infer that maybe I got my outgoing personality from my mom, who was so outgoing. That first component that we just sort of intuit is that there may be some sort of genetic passing on of the structures in our brain that tend to lead to an individual having an extroverted or introverted personality. So that whole world of examining the inheritability of particular personality traits and behaviors is behavioral genetics. So, to what degree can we map out on the genome qualities of our personality? It has been not easy. It's hard to imagine that any significant progress has been made on that so far. Probably not because personality doesn't have a genetic component, but because it is informed by multiple genetic components. So there's parts of the genome all over our DNA that contribute to the myriad of brain parts or whatever that give us the disposition for particular kinds of personality traits to appear. On top of that, we also know that the brain is a palette upon which experience paints, and those experiences have a huge role in our personalities. But the quest goes on, and we look at early. Not only do we look at traits that seem to be passed on genetically, we're also looking what is the first indication in human development of a personality. And anybody who has kids knows that it's pretty early along. There's a thing that we call temperament that comes out. Our children start to behave in ways that are unique to them, unique from their siblings, and they act in ways. And there's sort of a in the world of social psychology, there's this sort of dynamic that begins to happen that refers to a process called goodness of fit. This isn't in the course, but goodness of fit is to what degree does the temperament of the child coincide with the temperament of the caregiver, be that a parent or the daycare worker or whatever. And so if the child is a certain way, and that way is sort of counter to the individual's personality who's taking care of them, there might be some conflict and struggle on connecting with that individual. But nonetheless, we can certainly observe that early on children have a temperament, and that will be the nature of our first discussion. Our first discussion is going to look at temperament, and I want all of you folks who have had encounters with children and the opportunity to see them grow up. Do you feel that there's some qualities of that early temperament that ended up being pretty persistent through their lives? With my two children, very much so. Very much so. In some interesting ways, it's actually easier to look back their personality now, look back and say, oh, that was there. I just might not have been the predominant characteristics that was going on right then, but those characteristics were there in a way. So there's sort of an interpretive quality about that. So if you folks with children can share your stories about those children's early personalities and how they changed over time, and if they changed. Maybe they maybe there's something to be said for the early aspects of someone's personality, and maybe also include how it matched yours, the goodness of fit. That's not anywhere. I'm making this up. If you have some goodness of fit ideas, go ahead and put those in there. I had a child that was very outgoing and all over the place, and I'm really relatively reserved, and this was an issue sometimes, and so feel free to include that in your discussion. Now, of course, when we're looking at personality and behavior, even though this is a personality class, we take a look at the emotional center of our brain, which sort of is the regulator of emotions within our human experience, and that's the amygdala. The amygdala is the center of the emotional world, and a huge part of our development of personality is connected to our ability to manage our emotional world. So extroversion, introversion has to do with managing our emotional world. Neuroticism and anxiety have to do, the levels of that have to do with how we manage our emotional reactions. And we do recognize that in general, without any inclusion of any sort of predisposition or even disorder, um, we move as children, we have a relatively low level of control over our emotional expressions. We can see that in the behavior of children. Over time, we gain more and more control over that. So we should see a we should see more reactivity, more dynamic emotional expression in childhood to a more controlled. Not that there isn't dynamic there, it's just under willful control. And that characteristic we attach, that capability that we have to control our emotions, is a big part of what we would see in other people as part of their personality. And so that's where the amygdala comes in. Now, there's some other stuff that's going on right now. This is probably more cutting edge. I'm going to, for as some of you might know, I'm developing a class for next semester in neuropsychology. I'm going to be offering that class at UMA, and I've begun the development of that class, and I know there's a section coming up where we're going to talk about the findings that have been going on related to gut bacteria. So the symbiotic relationship between microorganisms within our bodies that help us digest food within our gut appear to have a tremendous connection to emotional regulation and personality. We are truly a multi-organism being, and the presence or absence of particular bacteria and organisms within our gut seem to be related to our behavior, our emotions, and maybe to the totality of our health. And so this is only at the beginning of research, but I'll be certainly doing my due diligence to bring some of that to your attention should you decide to take that class. Very interesting stuff. Next factor, evolutionary psychology. Are there behaviors that have been supported within natural selection to continue on to the next generation because they were adaptive in the past? And so one might say athleticism and what that leads to today in terms of a personality. A person who has developed athleticism and has strong athleticism in their genome will experience the world in a different way, and that experience then different way than a person who is not athletic and that individual's personality will be impacted by that. Is our tolerance for ambiguity? What about our ability to empathize with other individuals? Did the beginnings of that behavior way back in our genetic history, did that get selected for survival? Because as we became a more and more social organism, those traits became advantageous. So that's another view that psychology is taking on this particular subject. And the last one I'll talk about is brain plasticity, and it relates to the concept of mindfulness as a way in which we can willfully change our brains. Probably the best way to say it. Brain plasticity as a concept is not new, but we're becoming increasingly aware of just how plastic our brain is. Now, brain plasticity refers to the brain's capacity to physically adapt to changes in the environment, or changes in our behavior. So if we decide that we want to create a new habit and we engage in that behavior repeatedly over time, the neurological pathways that define that behavior become increasingly reinforced, and those paths become somewhat habitual. So individuals, for instance, that want to get in shape, at first will find a lot of trouble doing that, having the motivation even to do that kind of activity. Yet, science is showing that if that individual persists in their practice, it will become psychologically easier to do because the pathways for motivation, emotion, experience, self-reward, and even the physicality of working out will become easier. This process has really shed its light on some of the behaviors, the habitual behaviors that are problematic, the behavioral components of substance abuse. There's one half of that is the chemical addiction. The other half is the social psychological addiction. Could those pathways be modified through intense practice? And the answer is, in many cases, yes. It's a very, very useful way to treat the other half of that behavioral problem. And then it opens up for us to take a new look, potentially, at old practices that have long been held as sacred within many cultures, things like meditation, prayer, concentration, all of these ways in which we become mindful of our world around us and our place in it. And that is the assignment. I'm going to recommend that you use a particular app called The Smiling Mind, which is free. As far as I know, it's free. And initiating a plan of mindfulness that you will engage in for 2 weeks. At the end of that 2 weeks, you will write a paper about your experiences, and I'll get there in just a minute. The idea here is no different than creating a new habit in exercising, a new habit in your responses to anger, and here's a new habit in response to managing your experience of stress in your life. Our responses to stress are probably hardwired into our brain from everything we've been doing up until now. Maybe that's adaptive, maybe it's maladaptive, maybe there's more stress than you can handle. Perhaps by engaging in a mindfulness activity, which alone has shown the ability to cause some relief in stress, yet it also engages our brain plasticity to be able to respond at the biochemical level differently to stressful situations. There's not only the effect of having a timeout when you get into a mindfulness practice, there's also residual effects that come after that because an individual is practicing that way consistently. So there's a bunch of aspects of what I've been talking about in terms of willful control over the biology of our bodies that are at play here. First, you're engaging in an activity that requires you to focus your thinking as much as you can on a particular practice, be it a meditative practice or a reading practice. There's all kinds of ways in which to do that. Then we engage in that long enough, 2 weeks, for potentially for it to become easier to do. It's less of a task that we need to cross off, and it's just sort of the natural thing that we're going to do. It becomes easier to do. And thirdly, does it produce any residual effects because of its capacity to initiate brain plasticity? What a neat assignment, right? I think it does take some dedication. I'm asking you to dedicate, pick a start date and start doing that. Pick any one of the activities within that app. In fact, let's go to the course book here. Here's the assessment section for chapter 11. We have the discussion on temperament, of course. And then right below that, we have chapter 11 assignment, mindfulness. There's a link to the Smiling Mind app, both for iOS and Android devices. And here are all kinds of different things that people can do within that app. We have managing stress, mindfulness at work, mindfulness in sports, mindful eating, improving performance, attention and concentration, improving relationships, mindfulness in education, improving well-being, and sleep. You can pick any one of these or any others. It doesn't matter. And recognize that this is a mindfulness activity. It's not necessarily a meditation activity. Some people struggle with meditation. I struggle. I do it daily, and it's a daily struggle for me to not have my mind wander during that process. I'm fortunate that I'm using the Apple Fitness subscription, and they're continually reminding through this process that if your mind starts going, just gently bring it back. Perfectly fine. People do it all the time. It's not abnormal for people to, I'm sitting there and my mind starts racing. It's a gradual practice of bringing that down, and it has had a tremendous effect on me. I think it's very valuable. I'm not stress-free. I'm not enlightened anymore because of this process, but I do have a sense of I'm taking some time to do some of this mindfulness stuff, and I appreciate it. I like the break. I like the habits that it's producing and the thoughtfulness that it does produce. So really, I encourage you to give this a good whirl. Now let's look at the rest of the assignment here. We're looking at when we look at of course, the rubric, we have a title page. And then the goals is where you describe the goals that you set and which one of those programs you got into. Reflect. Now this is prior. The reflection is prior to starting. I'm actually to reflect on the problems you're trying to improve. Were you stressed, eating poorly, poor relationships, whatever it is, whenever one of those things were, and that you're reflecting on that. What was the issue going on? And then results. After 2 weeks of doing this, how'd it go? Well, here's your results is your record of successfully doing the app. That's pretty numeric. And the discussion is identifying any successes, barriers to success, and any changes you would make. And of course, mechanics and whatnot. Now, you may get to the end of these 2 weeks and I hated it. It's done. That's okay. That's okay. This is not for everyone. But I would really appreciate it if you actually did it and came to that conclusion rather than having preconceived notions of this. This is, you know, this school is a place to get uncomfortable and feel safe about it. So I hope it's what it's supposed to be. So I'm asking you to do, for some of you, I'm asking you to do something outside of your comfort zone. Give it a try. Give it the best try you can. Maybe it'll be something cool. Maybe it'll lead to something else serendipitously. You'll just like, oh, that was really cool. But that reminds me of this. You know, I came across this other thing that I would like to do that has sort of a meditative quality to it. You know, I take very long walks and I do cycling, and that those activities are incredibly meditative, let alone my swimming. I try to swim twice a week, and when I'm in the pool, wow, very, very, that's even better than my daily meditation in terms of quieting my mind, and quite a focused thing. And I walk out very, very invigorated. So now, because I'm asking for this assignment to cover actually 2 weeks. It's not due at the end of this week. It's due April 7th. So you have until April 7th to kind of put this thing together, and then by April 7th, submitting the paper. So you have a window here to get this done, a pretty wide window, a couple months in there to get that 2 week thing done. If you want to continue it, that's fine. Include that in your paper. And that's it for week 9. That's taking a look at the biology aspect or biological aspects of personality. So have a great week, and I'll see you online. Take care.